The first thing I noticed wasn't my husband, the donors, or the press line waiting to catch quotes. It was the necklace, my mother's diamond pendant, glittering at the base of another woman's throat. The ballroom at the Middleton Trust Gala hummed with small talk and champagne, but all the sound drained out as I stood there and watched the lights skip across stones I kept locked in a velvet pouch. The chain was short enough that the pendant rested exactly where my mother wore it on the last night she felt well, a detail that hit like a small, precise blow. I reached for my collarbone more out of reflex than reason, as if the touch could conjure the necklace back into my own hands. Across the room, the woman lifted her chin so the diamonds caught the chandelier's glow, and some part of me understood the message meant for me alone. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and tap like and subscribe if stories of justice, quiet strength, and dignity matter to you, because some truths deserve the light. I was born to steady people who measured success by whether the lights stayed on and Sunday supper tasted like home, not by the size of a donor wall, and they named me Claire, after my grandmother, who kept a ledger for every penny she stretched. When I met Adam, we were both too young to know how ambition can polish a story until it doesn't resemble the truth anymore. And he dazzled me with ideas that seemed big enough for both of us to live inside. He had a way of making a room lean toward him, while I had a way of making a room believe him. PR taught me how to fit the right words to other people's dreams, and for a long time, I didn't mind that the words were his. We married in a small church outside Nashville, wrote vows about partnership, and hung them in a frame above a desk we promised to share. For a while we did share it, his laptop balanced on one side, my color-coded binders on the other, until his side grew crowded with late-night plans, and my binders moved to a closet that no one opened unless something needed fixing. My mother passed 2 years into our marriage, leaving me a careful inheritance, and that pendant she wore only at births, graduations, and the kind of dinners where a person needed to remember she mattered. I put the money into Adam's company because he swore it would turn the grind into a life not just for us, but for the people he wanted to hire, and I believed him enough to sign the checks with a steady hand. When Nora arrived, sweet and colicky and perfect, I learned the art of doing 2 things at once, rocking a baby while formatting pitch decks, answering investors with one thumb while warming bottles with the other. I told myself this was partnership in a different season, that his long absences were like my long nights, both of us working for the same future and meeting in the middle whenever we could. It felt almost true whenever he came home with the smell of cold air in his coat, and Nora pressed her cheek to his tie like a small truce. Nashville is a city that pretends not to watch while it watches everything, and the higher Adam's profile climbed, the more our lives filled with events that had little to do with us and everything to do with who might be standing near us. I learned how to smile for cameras and make small talk that kept the spotlight off my exhaustion, and he learned how to take a call in the middle of dinner without making it seem like a slight. On paper, we were a sturdy pair, a growing company, a daughter who drew hearts in the margins of her math worksheets, a house that held our framed vows like a promise nailed to the wall. Underneath, small things started to move. Late returns, explained by traffic that never seemed to touch anyone else. A phone turned face down across our kitchen counter, a traveling calendar that changed without notice, but always landed him in the same glossier corners of town. I filed each detail away the way PR teaches you to store risk calmly, privately, in a drawer you hope you never have to open. I kept the pendant in my top dresser drawer, tucked in its blue velvet pouch between a baby bracelet and a stack of letters my mother wrote me when Nora was born, and I checked on it the way some people check their locks, lightly often, like a ritual meant to steady the mind. The week of the gala, I checked twice. The first time, my fingers brushed cool stone and I breathed easier. The second time, the pouch lay there empty, folded onto itself like a small, collapsed lung. I stood very still, the way you do when you're not sure whether you've misplaced a thing or a piece of yourself. And then I smoothed the velvet, and told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. There always had been up to now. I pressed the drawer shut and told the mirror that worry steals the joy you have left. Then I fastened a simple gold chain, the kind you wear when your heart is not ready for anything heavy, and I went to the gala. The Middleton ballroom smelled like lilies and fresh polish, and the chandeliers made everyone look a shade more forgiving than they are in daylight. I shook hands with donors who remembered my name and smiled at photographers who didn't, and for a few minutes, I managed to believe this was another night of professional kindness and careful talk. Then I saw her smiling, poise the pendant, sitting where my mother's hand used to rest when she took a breath before saying something that mattered, and my body knew the truth before my mind let it all the way in. The woman didn't touch the stones so much as present them, the gesture of someone used to being watched, and across the long path of tables, I felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with air conditioning or ice buckets. I could have turned away, pretended I'd mistaken the design, but I held my ground and let the light tell me what it knew. Later, people would say I walked as if I were following a line only I could see, but in that moment, I didn't move at all. I memorized the tilt of her chin, the thread of the chain, and the way the room brightened around her, as though the show had just begun. Beside her, a familiar profile flickered into view. Jaw-tense eyes, scanning the practiced ease of a man who believes in his own press, and the old frame above our desk flashed through my mind, partnership promise. The faith of two young people who thought forever meant the same thing. The band hit a bright note that sounded like glass, and laughter rose in a way that turned every head just enough to hide me for one beat. In that borrowed privacy, I felt the first clean edge of anger, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that sharpens. I smoothed the skirt of my dress and lifted my shoulders. And because a single truth can change the air in a room, I watched her lean into the light as if to make sure I saw exactly what I was supposed to see. The night of the gala left me hollow, but emptiness quickly gave way to something sharper. I replayed the image of Sloane tilting her head so the necklace caught the light, the way Adam sat beside her with his hand resting on her leg, his expression daring me to react. I went home with the sound of laughter still echoing in my ears like a cruel chorus reminding me of the role I'd been shoved into without consent. By morning, the disbelief had worn off, and the questions began to rise. How long had they been flaunting their secret, and how many people had noticed before I did? Adam stumbled in late that night after the gala, the smell of liquor clinging to his jacket, pretending nothing unusual had happened. He tossed his keys on the counter, kissed Nora on the forehead as she slept, and carried on as if betrayal wasn't dripping from every movement. I didn't confront him then. The weight in my chest was too heavy, and my voice felt lodged somewhere I couldn't reach. But as I folded myself into bed, I knew the silence wouldn't hold forever. The signs hadn't been subtle in hindsight. His late returns had stretched into entire weekends away explanations that unraveled if I pulled at the thread too hard. He always had a reason: client dinners, out-of-town meetings, sudden calls from investors that couldn't wait. Each excuse stacked neatly on top of the last, a wall I had trained myself not to climb. His phone, once left in plain sight on the counter, now never left his pocket. When I reached for it absent-mindedly one evening, just to check the time, he snatched it back so quickly it startled me. "Work stuff," he muttered, but the tone carried an edge I hadn't heard before. I had smoothed over the first hints of doubt, the lipstick smudge that appeared on a collar, the unfamiliar perfume lingering in the car he claimed to have loaned to a colleague. I even convinced myself that the canceled 10th anniversary dinner was bad luck, until the photo surfaced the next day, Adam smiling for the camera, Sloane at his side, their glasses raised in a toast. I'd wanted to believe it was professional, that my husband simply valued her contributions at work. But the unease clung to me no matter how many explanations I tried to weave around it. The breaking point didn't come from me at all. It came from Nora. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table coloring while I chopped vegetables for dinner. Her voice was light casual as she mentioned seeing her daddy at lunch that day. She had shiny hair and laughed a lot. Nora said, her little hands busy with crayons. He gave her flowers after. I gripped the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white, forcing my face into a smile I didn't feel. "That's nice, sweetheart," I whispered, though inside I was unraveling. My 8-year-old had stumbled onto the truth I had been avoiding. That evening, when Adam came home, the air clung to him like a stranger's signature expensive cologne. I didn't own one I had never smelled on him before. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, as if nothing were amiss, but I caught the faint trace of lipstick along his jawline. I turned away quickly, pretending to be distracted by the stove, but my chest tightened with every breath. There was no hiding anymore. Denial had lost its grip. I told myself not to crumble in front of Nora, not to let her carry the weight of what her father was doing. I tucked her into bed that night with an extra story and brushed her hair away from her face, promising her quietly that she was safe. Only when her breathing evened out did I let the tears come muffling them into a pillow so she wouldn't hear. Betrayal had moved from suspicion into certainty, and I felt the foundation of my life shift beneath me. Adam had always been good at flipping blame. When I raised concerns in the past, he called me paranoid, insecure, ungrateful for everything he was building. He would turn my instincts against me until I wondered if I had imagined it all. But this time, his gaslighting couldn't hold. The necklace around Sloane's neck, the flowers Nora described, the scent of another woman on his skin, each detail lined up too perfectly. It wasn't paranoia, it was proof. The realization came with a sick kind of clarity. All those years I had defended him to family and friends, insisting his long hours were for us, insisting his distance was temporary, insisting that the strain was worth the future we were building. I had been shielding him, not protecting myself. I thought about the inheritance I poured into his company, the nights I spent rocking a crying baby alone, while he was out chasing deals, the countless sacrifices I had made in silence. He hadn't just betrayed me as a wife. He had betrayed the family I built around him with everything I had. I didn't confront him that night or the next. The words sat on my tongue, bitter and sharp, but I held them back. I knew if I exploded too soon, he would twist the narrative until I became the problem. He'd say I was dramatic, unstable, ruining what he had built. So I stayed quiet, letting the anger solidify into something colder, something steadier. I began to watch him with new eyes, cataloging his movements, listening to the hollow explanations, waiting for the mask to slip again. The city still saw him as a visionary, the golden boy with ambition too large for a single skyline. They didn't see the shadows that crept in with him when he came home late, or the way his eyes darted when Nora mentioned her day. But I saw it now, and I couldn't unsee it. My life, the one I thought was secure, was no longer mine. It was propped up by lies, and every hour I spent pretending made me feel smaller. One evening, he came home later than usual, jacket draped over his arm, phone buzzing in his pocket. I asked lightly about his day, about where he had been, and his answer stumbled in places it shouldn't have. "Meetings," he said. "You know how it is." His eyes didn't meet mine, and I let the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. It was a small victory, knowing he could feel my doubt, even if I didn't voice it aloud. I began to see Sloane's name more often whispered in conversations, at events mentioned in articles about the company's growth. She had become his shadow, present in places where I once stood beside him. People looked at me with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and I realized they knew more than they said. The humiliation was no longer private. It was spreading, creeping into every corner of the world I had built. By the time the gala arrived, My denial was gone, even if I hadn't admitted it out loud. When I saw my mother's necklace displayed like a prize on Sloane's throat, all the fragments clicked together. Adam hadn't just strayed. He had stolen something sacred, something that tied me to the woman who raised me. He had taken the last piece of my mother and handed it to his mistress like it was nothing. That was the moment the anger hardened into resolve. No amount of tears or whispered excuses would soften what he had done. I couldn't look at him the same way again, couldn't hear his voice without hearing the lies layered beneath it. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly beside me, I realized there was no going back. The cracks in our marriage had become chasms, and denial no longer served me. The first act of betrayal had already written itself, and the next step was no longer about whether he had been unfaithful. It was about what I would do, now that the truth had become undeniable. And as the moonlight fell across our room, cold and unforgiving, I knew the time for silence was coming to an end. The days after the gala moved like water thickened, with mud, slow and heavy, each moment clouded by what I now knew with certainty. Adam carried on, as if nothing had shifted, as if my silence meant consent, while inside me, everything was cracking. I had lived with doubt before, but living with proof was different. It was heavier, sharper, impossible to set aside. At night, after Nora was tucked into bed and the house went quiet, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The faint glow of Adam's phone would flicker beside me as he typed with quick, secretive precision, his back turned. I stopped asking who he was messaging. I already knew. My tears came quietly, then silent enough not to wake Nora, but steady enough that my pillow carried the truth of what I was enduring. I hated myself for crying in the dark, while the man who betrayed me slept easily a few feet away. During the day, I tried to keep life normal for Nora. I packed her lunch with care, braided her hair before school, and smiled when she told me about spelling tests or playground games. But the weight pressed down even in those moments, and sometimes I had to turn away to steady my breath. She had already carried more truth than an 8-year-old should, and I refused to let her see me crumbling. Still, children notice more than we think. More than once, I caught her eyes studying me, searching for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. The house itself began to feel unfamiliar. Every corner seemed to whisper back pieces of memory I couldn't bear to revisit. Late nights spent waiting on the couch, the birthday dinners Adam promised, but canceled the anniversary flowers that never came. Even the desk where our vows once hung became a monument to everything I had given up. I would trace the frame with my fingertips and wonder how many of those promises he had broken before I even realized. Family and friends had begun to notice as well. A cousin stopped by one afternoon bringing cookies for Nora and asked lightly if Adam was still working such long hours. The pause before my answer gave me away, and I watched her smile falter. In church, an older woman patted my hand a little too long, her eyes full of sympathy she didn't put into words. Their silence told me enough. They had seen the whispers, the photos, the rumors. My humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was quietly shared, a story passed in polite tones that never reached my ears directly. I tried once to confront Adam in a measured way. One evening after dinner, I set down my fork and asked, "Are you seeing her?" He looked at me with that practiced disbelief, the kind meant to make me question myself. "Claire, not this again," he said, as if I were dragging up nonsense. He laughed softly, called me paranoid, and asked why I always needed to stir up trouble. The calmness in his voice cut deeper than shouting ever could. I didn't push further. I couldn't afford to give him more ammunition to use against me. After that night, I stopped asking. I began carrying the truth quietly like a stone in my pocket, heavy but hidden. My grief became a private ritual. I would cry in the shower, where the water drowned the sound, or into a folded towel when the ache grew unbearable. At times, I wrote in a notebook I kept tucked in the back of a drawer, lines of pain I couldn't speak aloud. Writing became the only way to keep from unraveling completely. Nora gave me the only glimmers of light during that season. Her laughter, when it came, was a reminder of what still mattered. She would curl beside me on the couch, head against my arm, and chatter about her day. I held her close, breathing her in, promising myself I would protect her from the worst of this storm. But even then, shadows crept in. One evening, she asked quietly, "Mommy, why are you sad?" I kissed her hair and told her I was just tired. She accepted it, but her eyes lingered on me longer than usual, and I knew she sensed more. I felt like I was disappearing in my own life. The woman who once spoke with authority in boardrooms, who knew how to craft messages that could sway entire rooms, had been reduced to silence in her own kitchen. I had traded my voice for the illusion of stability, and now I was paying for it with tears no one else saw. The weight of all those swallowed instincts pressed harder with each passing day. The nights grew colder. Sometimes I would find myself standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street, wondering how many other women had stood in the same place, living beside men who smiled to the world while breaking them in private. The thought was both isolating and oddly comforting. I wasn't alone, even if I felt it. Still, the knowledge did little to soothe me. I began to realize the cost of continuing this way. The grief was no longer just mine. It seeped into the edges of Nora's world, into the silence between Adam and me, into the way people looked at me with pity instead of respect. I was living in a house built on lies, and no amount of denial could change that. And yet, for a time, I stayed in that place of hidden pain, letting the days blur together, while my heart carried the weight in silence. I told myself I needed to endure a little longer to protect Nora until I could find a way forward. But the ache was growing sharper, the silence harder to bear. Something inside me was shifting, and I could feel it in the steadiness of my own breath. By the time the leaves began to turn outside our windows, the grief had hardened into something else, an ember that glowed quietly in the dark. I wasn't ready to move yet, but I knew the day was coming when my silence would no longer hold. The morning after another restless night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were swollen, my hair limp, and my shoulders slumped like the weight of everything I had carried was finally visible. I had always told myself that my sacrifices were noble, that giving up a career and pouring myself into Adam's vision was a sign of loyalty. But as I studied my reflection, I no longer saw devotion. I saw someone who had allowed herself to vanish. The memory of my mother's necklace flashed again, Sloane flaunting it at the gala. Adam smirking at my reaction, the whispers echoing through the crowd. That necklace had been my last connection to my mother, a piece of her love I thought no one could take. Now it had been paraded like a trophy by the woman who had slipped into my marriage without shame. Grief shifted inside me, its edges sharpening into something colder. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I felt a steadiness that surprised me. For years I had lived in Adam's shadow, convincing myself his long hours and broken promises were part of a greater plan for our future. I had silenced my instincts, swallowed accusations, and let him tell me who I was. Paranoid, dramatic, ungrateful. But that morning, with the mirror showing me what I had become, I knew I couldn't keep waiting for him to define me. My silence had protected him, not me, and it had cost me pieces of myself I could never get back. I walked into the bedroom and saw him asleep, his phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. The sight no longer sparked heartbreak, it only fueled my resolve. I slipped on my robe, patted downstairs, and opened my laptop. Years of helping him with proposals and investor pitches had left me familiar with every corner of his finances. He believed I was a housewife too far removed to understand, but he had forgotten that I once signed the checks and sent the contracts. The access was still mine. My fingers trembled as I logged into our joint accounts, but once the numbers appeared, my movements grew steady. I froze the credit cards tied to my name, placed holds on the household account, and cut off the lines he used for day-to-day expenses. It took less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime of swallowing pain had finally given way to action. When I closed the laptop, my hands were steady, not shaking. For the first time in years, I felt in control. By mid-morning, I called Dana, a friend I hadn't leaned on in far too long. She had built her reputation on difficult divorces, never one to shy away from a fight. My voice was calm as I told her I needed help. "I want someone ruthless," I said quietly, glancing toward the stairs where Nora played. "Someone who doesn't care about keeping things civil." She didn't hesitate. "Come by the office tomorrow," she replied. "We'll start with the basics." Just hearing her voice firm and certain made me feel less alone. That afternoon, I pulled boxes from the attic and began packing, not because I planned to leave, but because I wanted Adam to see that I could. I filled them with the things that mattered most: Nora's baby albums, family heirlooms, important documents. Each item I placed inside reminded me of everything I had carried alone while he played at being someone else's hero. I stacked the boxes neatly by the door, a warning in plain sight. If I chose, I could take everything that mattered and walk away. By evening, I heard the first cracks in his composure. His card had been declined at a hotel bar, then again at a restaurant. My phone buzzed with call after call, each one more frantic than the last. I let them ring out, listening only to the voicemails. The first was sharp with anger. "What the hell did you do? This isn't funny, Claire." The next shifted into bargaining. "We can sit down and talk this through. Don't make this bigger than it has to be." Finally, panic threaded his voice. "Please, you don't understand how this could affect the company." I laughed, the sound startling even me. He still thought this was about his reputation, about the company's survival. He hadn't realized yet that I no longer cared about protecting him. This wasn't about saving face. This was about reclaiming mine. That night, after Nora went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a notebook. I began listing assets, accounts, contracts, every scrap of leverage I could gather. Each line I wrote steadied me further, every detail, another weapon placed carefully in my hands. By the time I closed the notebook, I felt lighter. I didn't need to scream or plead anymore. I was preparing. When Adam finally came home past midnight, his face was drawn tight, his jaw clenched. He tried to step inside as though nothing had shifted, but his eyes darted to the boxes by the door. "What's all this?" he demanded. I looked up from the couch, my voice even. "A reminder that I can leave whenever I choose." His face hardened, but he didn't press further. He knew better than to challenge the steadiness he heard in my tone. As he walked upstairs, muttering under his breath, I stayed where I was, feeling the quiet strength settle in my bones. For years, I had let him script the story of our life, casting me as the devoted wife who kept the house warm while he chased glory. But now I was rewriting the script line by line, and he didn't even realize it. By the end of the week, the whispers had already started in our social circle. Friends texted me screenshots of group chats, some filled with pity, others with admiration. At church, Mrs. Cartwright squeezed my hand and said softly, "Don't you let him crawl back, honey. Men like that only learn when they lose." Her words rang in my ears long after I left. Support was stacking up in places Adam never expected, and I knew it was only the beginning. I watched him pace the driveway one evening, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but strained. His empire, the one he had built with my inheritance, and my silence was beginning to wobble. He didn't know yet just how much of it I controlled. I closed the curtain, my heart steady, and poured myself a glass of wine. The grief I once carried in secret had transformed into something entirely different. I wasn't just surviving his betrayal anymore. I was preparing for the fight ahead, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The morning after I froze the accounts, I woke with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Adam was already gone. No note, no word about where he was headed. The silence didn't sting anymore. It cleared space for my own thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and opened the notebook I'd started the night before. Every page filled with lists, dates, and account numbers was a quiet reminder that I wasn't powerless. By mid-morning, my phone lit up with his calls again. First came the rage, his voice clipped and harsh on voicemail. "Claire, you've lost your mind. You can't just do this." A few hours later, the tone shifted to pleading. "Please, let's sit down. We can figure this out together." By evening, panic had crept in. "You're hurting both of us. Don't you see that I didn't answer a single one?" Each call left me more certain that I was moving in the right direction. The next day, I met Dana at her office downtown. She greeted me with a firm handshake and ushered me into a quiet room lined with heavy books and neat stacks of case files. "You've been carrying this for a long time," she said as she poured us coffee. I nodded, sliding the folder of documents across the table. Bank statements, old contracts, copies of checks I'd written years ago to fund his startup. She flipped through them with sharp, practiced eyes. "You have more leverage than you realize," she told me, her voice steady. "We're not just talking about divorce. We're talking about dismantling his control." Walking out of her office that day, I felt lighter. For the first time, someone else had looked at the pieces of my life and confirmed what I already knew. Adam's empire had been built on my sacrifices, and I had every right to reclaim what was mine. That evening, when Adam showed up at the house, he was visibly unraveling. His tie hung loose, his jaw tight, and his hands clenched at his sides. He tried to push past me when I opened the door, but I held firm. "We need to talk," he demanded. I crossed my arms. "No, you need to listen," he scoffed, his voice laced with frustration. "You think freezing accounts and making scenes makes you strong? You're ruining everything I've built." I kept my voice calm. "Everything we built, Adam. With my inheritance? With my years? With my silence while you played house with her." His eyes flickered a brief flash of recognition before hardening again. "So this is about money," he muttered. I shook my head. "No. This is about respect, something you'll never understand." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I saw the man behind the mask, cornered, desperate, dangerous. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You'll regret this." I held his gaze and replied softly. "Not as much as you will." Then I shut the door, leaving him standing outside in the fading light. Inside, I leaned against the doorframe, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. For years I had been reacting to his choices, his lies, his betrayals. Now I was the one setting the pace. Word began to spread quickly through our circle. Memphis has a way of carrying stories faster than any newspaper. Friends texted me, some offering sympathy, others quiet admiration. Screenshots of group chats made their way to me, women sharing sharp comments about Sloane parading in jewels that weren't hers. At church the next Sunday, Mrs. Cartwright gripped my hand firmly. "Don't you let him crawl back," she whispered. "Men like him only learn when they lose." Her words anchored me steady and sure. Meanwhile, Sloane's carefully polished life was beginning to fray. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Eric, her husband, had confronted her after the gala. He wanted to know why the entire city had seen her draped in another man's arm wearing a necklace that didn't belong to her. She told him it was just business, but the humiliation had already seeped into their marriage. Doctors don't like being made into fools, and I knew it was only a matter of time before their facade collapsed. Adam, desperate to regain control, started showing up unannounced. One evening, he pounded on the door until I opened it a crack. His face was flushed, his voice harsh. "You're making us both look ridiculous. Do you realize what people are saying?" I steadied myself, keeping my voice level. "About you, yes. About me, they're calling me brave." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Freezing accounts and throwing tantrums doesn't make you strong, Claire. It makes you reckless." I leaned against the frame, my tone cutting through his bluster. "You wanted me silent and obedient. That woman is gone." His eyes darted toward the stairs where Nora was finishing homework. For a moment, he softened, but the desperation underneath only sharpened his edge. "We can fix this. I'll apologize. We'll spin it. People will forget." I shook my head. "I'd rather burn it all than be your prop again." The muscles in his jaw twitched. He opened his mouth as if to lash out, then stopped himself. He knew better than to risk a scene with neighbors nearby and our daughter upstairs. His parting words were bitter. "You'll regret this." I closed the door again, my body buzzing with adrenaline. Upstairs, I checked on Nora, tucking her hair behind her ear as she bent over her workbook. She looked up and smiled faintly, unaware of the storm her father had stirred outside. I kissed her forehead and promised myself she would never carry the weight of his choices. She would see strength in me, not tears. That night, I sat at the table again, adding to my notebook. Each line was another brick in the foundation of my plan. I no longer felt like the broken woman staring at her reflection in the mirror. I felt like someone preparing for battle, steady and certain. Adam had thought humiliation would be my undoing, but it had become the fire forging something stronger. The next stage wouldn't be silent. It would be deliberate, calculated, and visible. He had paraded his betrayal in public, and soon I would return the favor. The restaurant smelled faintly of cedar smoke and buttered rolls, the kind of place Adam loved to use as his stage. Investors and their wives filled the long table, laughter humming above the clink of crystal glasses. At the head sat Adam, his suit pressed to perfection, his hand resting casually on Sloane's wrist as she leaned in with her loud, polished laugh. I paused in the doorway, letting my presence register before I stepped forward. The room fell into a hush as eyes turned my way, and I saw Adam's smile falter. He started to rise, his voice low and practiced Claire. "This isn't the time." I cut him off steady and clear. "You've said enough. I'll take the floor." Sloane's lips curled into the same smug grin I had seen at the gala, the one that haunted me in the dark. I met her gaze and asked, "Does your husband know where you are tonight?" The smile flickered her fingers, twitching against the stem of her glass. Around the table, chairs shifted as unease settled into the air. Adam muttered sharply, Don't do this. But I had already arranged the moment. At the entrance, a tall figure appeared. Dr. Eric Carter, crisp, in a white shirt, his coat draped over one arm. His face was pale with fury, his steps controlled but heavy. The entire table turned toward him as silence thickened. "How long did you think you could play me for a fool, Sloane?" His voice carried across the room, calm but cutting. Sloane pushed back her chair so abruptly it screeched against the floor. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her eyes darting from him to me. I stepped closer, my voice sharp enough to slice through her excuse. "It's exactly what it looks like. You've been parading around with another woman's husband wearing a necklace that was never yours." Gasps rippled through the room, the investors' wives clutching at pearls and napkins, their husbands sitting rigid with discomfort. Eric reached into his pocket and dropped a small velvet box onto the table with a dull thud. "That's your wedding ring," he said flatly. "Pawn it if you like, since you seem to enjoy living off other people's men." The box sat between the wine glasses like a stone dropped into water, and the ripples reached every corner of the room. Sloane's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she tried to hide them in her lap. Adam attempted to salvage what he could, raising his hands in a futile gesture. "This isn't the place for drama," he insisted. I leaned in, my voice steady, but rising just enough for every ear to hear. "No, Adam. This is exactly the place. You humiliated me in public, and now the truth is here in the open, too." I let the words land before turning to the investors. "Do business with him if you want, but remember the kind of man you're tying yourself to." The room erupted as I walked out. Phones glowed screens lifted discreetly to capture every detail. By the time I reached the sidewalk, I knew the scene would spread across Memphis like wildfire. Adam had always believed he controlled the story. That night, I had rewritten it. The fallout came quickly. Within days, hashtags began appearing online. Photos of Sloane at the gala beside Adam were placed next to images of her husband walking away from the restaurant. Screenshots of her flaunting my mother's necklace became digital evidence circulating faster than either of them could contain. People called it Necklacegate, and soon even those outside our circle knew the story. Adam scrambled to regain control. He sat for a glossy magazine interview, his suit perfect, his eyes carefully weary. He spoke of mistakes, called me vindictive, painted himself as a visionary betrayed by a bitter wife. Watching it, I felt a hollow disgust. I had expected lies, but not the ease with which strangers might believe them. For a brief moment, fear gripped me. What if the world turned against me? Then the leaks began. Emails, receipts, text messages, proof that Adam had used company funds to finance his affair. Hotel bills marked as business trips, spa treatments charged to corporate cards. Even notes to Sloane telling her which account to use. She won't notice one read. By noon, the screenshots flooded social media, dissected by people who had never met us but understood corruption when they saw it. Adam tried to deny everything with a shaky live stream from his office. "These so-called leaks are fake," he said, his shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes red. "My wife has gone too far." The comments section turned against him instantly. "Screenshots don't look fake. You stole your wife's mom's necklace, bro. Sit down." Clips of him stumbling through answers went viral, remixed with mocking captions until his performance became a punchline. Meanwhile, Sloane vanished from view. Rumor spread that Eric had thrown her out, that she was living in a hotel. Her name disappeared from social calendars and charity boards. For a moment, I almost pitied her. But then I remembered the way she tilted her chin at the gala, daring me to notice. Pity had no place here. One evening, Adam called, his voice raw with desperation. "Please, Claire, you have to stop this. We can fix it together. Just tell them it's lies." I listened silent, then answered quietly. You humiliated me. You stole from me. And now you want me to save you? No, Adam. You fix this yourself. He tried once more softer. Think about Nora. She doesn't deserve to grow up with this circus. I closed my eyes, pain flickering, but I steadied my voice. I am thinking about her. That's why I won't let you rewrite the story. Then I ended the call. The next morning, another wave hit an audio recording of Adam bragging to a colleague after too much whiskey. His words cut through me cruel and careless. She's too loyal to leave. I could burn the house down and she'd still beg me to stay. The clip went viral within hours, and suddenly, women everywhere were using it as a rallying cry, sharing their own stories of betrayal. The hashtag #BegMeToStay trended for days, each post another nail in the coffin of Adam's carefully built image. Sponsors began pulling out of his company. One investor issued a statement distancing himself, citing ethical concerns. The golden boy of Memphis business was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. And I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged. I had simply let the truth breathe. As the days passed, I sat on the porch with Nora, watching her draw pictures with chalk on the steps. The sound of her laughter was a balm, reminding me of what truly mattered. Adam's empire was burning, and I no longer carried the shame. It was his alone. But I knew the fight wasn't finished. The courtroom still waited, and there in front of a judge, the final reckoning would come. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, a place where lives unraveled in orderly rows of benches. Adam sat at the far table, his once perfect suit hanging loose on his frame, the sheen of confidence worn down to something brittle. His lawyer leaned in often, whispering hurried advice, while Adam rubbed his temples and stared at the floor. I sat across from him, steady and silent, my attorney Dana at my side, with files stacked neatly before her. The judge's gavel called the room to order, and from the first moment, Adam was no longer the man who had towered over me for years. Dana presented the story piece by piece. The inheritance I had poured into his company, the contracts signed with my signature, the bank statements showing my funds propping up his vision. She spoke with calm precision, and each page of evidence struck like another nail, sealing his control away. Adam tried to object, his voice strained and impatient, but the judge cut him off more than once. His arguments sounded rehearsed, flimsy, against the weight of the documents projected on the screen. When Dana moved to the receipts for hotel stays and spa trips charged to company accounts, his face flushed red. He shifted in his seat, gripping his pen so tightly it bent in his hand. Then came the recording. The courtroom grew still as his drunken words echoed through the speakers. She's too loyal to leave. I could burn the house down and she'd still beg me to stay. The words hung in the air, cruel and careless. Adam's head dropped into his hands. For years, he had told me I was paranoid, dramatic, ungrateful. Now his own voice betrayed him in front of everyone. When the judge read the ruling, my hands remained folded in my lap. Majority custody of Nora, ownership of the house, a significant share of the company tied directly to my financial investment at its founding. Adam argued desperate, insisting I hadn't been involved in the business. Dana countered with his own emails praising my contributions, proof that I had been there in the early days, carrying more weight than he ever admitted. The gavel came down swiftly, final and firm. His empire was no longer his alone. The weeks that followed only deepened the blow. Contracts dissolved, investors withdrew, sponsors released public statements distancing themselves from Adam's leadership. The board voted to strip him of decision-making authority, reducing him from visionary CEO to a liability. The golden boy of Memphis business was gone. Sloan had already disappeared from the public eye after the restaurant confrontation. Rumors swirled of divorce filings and property disputes, her name erased from charity boards and social rosters. She had become untouchable, her once polished image tarnished beyond repair. Adam, left standing in the fallout, had no one left to shield him. The final cut came from his own family. His father called one evening, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Claire, I can't condone what my son has done. You'll have our support moving forward. Nora is still our granddaughter." It wasn't affection, but it was acknowledgement, something I had never truly received from them before. A few days later, Adam's brother released a public statement through his company citing ethical concerns and severing ties with Adam's name. The betrayal of his own family left him with nothing to lean on. The house became officially mine within weeks. I walked through the rooms with boxes removing his presence one item at a time. His suits, his trophies, the photos he insisted remain on the walls to portray us as the perfect couple, all of it went into storage. With each box sealed, the air grew lighter. Nora adjusted more quickly than I expected. She asked fewer questions about her father, though I often caught her watching me closely as if memorizing what strength looked like. I made sure she saw it calm and steady, no breakdowns on the kitchen floor, no pleading phone calls. When Adam arrived for his visitation weekends, I met him at the door, handed Nora her bag, and kept my words clipped and formal. He tried at first to charm me, to break the silence with humor. When that failed, he shifted to pleading. "Please, Claire, we don't have to keep fighting." I looked him in the eye and answered evenly. "You started this war when you dragged me through the dirt. Don't ask me to clean you up now." He hated that he couldn't rattle me anymore. By summer's end, the life he had flaunted was gone. His company shares were liquidated. His penthouse lease defaulted. He moved into a small rental on the edge of town, a far cry from the luxury he once showed off. The same people who once clung to his charm now crossed the street to avoid being seen with him. One afternoon at the grocery store, I overheard two women whisper as he passed unshaven and clutching a six-pack of cheap beer. "That's him, right? The one from Necklace Gate." Their laughter followed him out the door. I didn't smile, but I didn't stop them either. Humiliation was exactly what he had once wished on me. Now it was his to live with every day. The man who told me I'd be nothing without him had become nothing without me. His downfall wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of every choice he made. Yet the war wasn't just about dismantling him. It was about reclaiming myself. I had walked through fire, and I was finally standing in my own strength. Adam was broke, disgraced, and forgotten, but I was only beginning to build again. And even as his shadow lingered at the edges, I knew he wasn't finished trying to claw his way back into my life. The knock came late on a rainy night, heavy and uneven, like it carried desperation instead of confidence. I already knew it was Adam before I opened the door. He stood on the porch, soaked through his jacket clutched in one hand, his face hollowed by months of losses. For a moment, I saw not the man who once commanded boardrooms, but someone reduced to pleading. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking, "please just hear me out." His words tumbled out how everyone had turned their back on him, how he had nothing left, how he didn't want to lose Nora. His eyes searched mine for softness, for the woman who once smoothed his edges and carried his burdens. But that woman no longer lived here. I told him gently but firmly that he hadn't lost me because of one mistake. He lost me because he treated me as disposable. And now, standing in the rain, he knew what it felt like to be discarded. He tried again, clinging to the one thread he thought might sway me. "I don't want to lose Nora." The words hit harder, but I kept steady. He hadn't thought about her when he left lipstick on his collar, when he let another woman wear my mother's necklace, when he humiliated us both in front of the city. He wasn't holding her name out of love, he was holding it out of desperation. I met his eyes and told him so. The rain dripped from his hair onto the hardwood floor as he whispered, "I can change. Please, give me another chance. I'll do anything." I searched his face, looking for even a flicker of the man I once believed in. All I saw was fear of being alone, not true remorse. "You think begging makes you different from the man who betrayed me," I said quietly. "It doesn't. It just makes you desperate." His shoulders slumped. His voice cracked, and he whispered, "I can't do this without you." I stepped back, my hand resting on the door. "You are the architect of your own destruction, Adam. Don't look at me to rebuild what you burned." His mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. I told him to go home, wherever that might be, because it would never be here, and then I shut the door. Through the glass, I watched him shrink under the downpour until he finally walked into the darkness. When the silence settled again, I leaned against the door and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake, and my heart didn't race. The war was over, and I had won. 6 months later, the house felt different, lighter, calmer. The shadows Adam left behind had lifted. Nora blossomed in ways I hadn't expected, her laughter filling the halls, without the weight of tension hanging over us. At 8 years old, she understood enough to know her father had made choices that hurt us. But what mattered was that her mother had chosen strength. I could already see it shaping her, the way she stood taller, the way she asked bold questions. I rebuilt my career too. The same skills I once used to polish Adam's image, I turned toward myself. Consulting work poured in: PR strategies, brand projects, campaigns that let me prove I hadn't lost my edge. Clients respected resilience, and my story carried weight. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was thriving. Sometimes I heard whispers of Adam. Someone saw him nursing a drink at a dive bar. Another mentioned he was crashing on a friend's couch. His name faded from the circles that once clung to him, his empire reduced to memory. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. His downfall wasn't my prize. My prize was the freedom to live without him. One evening, Nora and I sat on the porch, watching fireflies glow against the twilight. She leaned against me, her voice soft but sure. "Mommy, you're really strong." I kissed the top of her head and smiled. "So are you, sweetheart. Stronger than you know." That moment mattered more than any courtroom victory or financial settlement. It was the legacy I wanted her to carry. The city moved on. The hashtags faded. The gossip shifted to the next scandal. But I carried the truth with me, not as a wound, but as a lesson. My mother's necklace sat safely in my drawer again. For a time, I couldn't bear to look at it. Now it felt different, not a reminder of loss, but of survival. Her strength had carried me through, and I carried that strength forward. Adam never got back what he lost. Not the company, not the money, not the family. He became a cautionary tale, while I became myself again. Hatred no longer had a place in me. Hatred gave him too much power. What I held instead was peace. Because freedom isn't the absence of pain. It's the choice to stop living in it. When I look at my reflection now, I don't see the broken woman frozen at a gala, while another woman flaunted her mother's necklace. I see someone steadier, sharper, unafraid. Betrayal nearly destroyed me, but instead it transformed me. And in that transformation, I found everything. I thought I had lost myself, my future, my peace. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, stay connected here.